Well, it's been a couple minutes, so why don't we get started? Welcome, and I'd like to thank everyone for their time today. These are tough times we're all living through, and I hope everyone is happy, healthy, and staying safe and sane these days. Related to that, what we'd like to talk about today is business continuity, what we're seeing in this market, and how others are dealing with this crisis. My name is Travis Darrow, and I'm Risk Solution Sales for the West Enterprise Group. And these days, I'm definitely hearing from a lot of customers asking about business continuity. So I'm glad to talk to you about that today. We also have joining with us our partner, Edgile. So I'll now turn it over to them for introductions, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. And I'm Brandon Sprankle. I'm a Manager Director with Edgile. I'm focused on all things IRM, specifically BCM. You'll also be hearing from Chris Roberts, who's a director in the same group, as well as Jay Dial, who's a senior manager in our group. So really looking forward to showing and telling some of the things that we're seeing in the marketplace as it relates to BCM. Next slide. So one of the things we just want to, I guess, start with at the top of the session is what are some of the key takeaways that you're going to have? First, we're going to be looking for you to really learn how to assess today's increases in risk and operational security. And so really focusing on today and what maybe the next year to 18 months looks like. For those of you that are on ServiceNow BCM, we're going to show you how to leverage some of that functionality for the pandemic response, and also talk about where you can implement functionality really quickly in 2 weeks to address today's COVID-19 risk. So a lot of fun things to get through over the next 45 minutes to 50 minutes. And with that, turn it back over to Travis, who will talk about the BCM product.
Great, thanks for that, Brandon. So we'll get into the presentation now. Now, you might have heard the name Simon Sinek. He's an author and thought leader, and he talks about how people care about what you do, but more importantly, they care about why you do it. And that's important here at ServiceNow because we're a mission-driven company. And our mission is to make the world of work better for people, to unlock productivity for people within companies. And that mission runs across all of our businesses, especially from a risk, compliance, and business continuity perspective. So ServiceNow is making the world of work better for people and digitizing those workflows so that organizations can work better, so they can plan better, so they can respond better, and these days, so they can get back to work better. In terms of risk in the overall market, Allianz does a risk barometer survey across organizations on an annual basis. And consistently, business interruptions are ranked first as the most important global risk. The likelihood of interruptions is increasing, and the impact of these interruptions is increasing. And we're seeing that really play out today. So what's the impact of a disruption to your business? Well, a research firm, Gartner, found that each minute of downtime costs an enterprise $5,500. Now, this could be higher or lower for your business, but you can imagine a major disruption to one or more of your sites and how costly that could be to you. Even at $2,000 a minute, over hours or days, that's a major impact. And here at ServiceNow, we actually have programs where we can engage with you on this point and prove out your business case and quantify this ROI related to your business issues. So what we're hearing from customers, especially today, is that they're experiencing a rapid digital transformation. Literally, every company is having to become a digital company overnight because of COVID. And this is increasing digital risk, the risk of a breach or an incident, and related impact. The cost of compliance continues to increase, and that's an ongoing challenge that customers are faced with. Reliance on third and fourth parties is high, and that creates exposure to additional risk. Companies are also looking to consolidate and rationalize the number of vendors to potentially restructure their supply chains because of what we're dealing with now. So issues in any of these areas can impact your reputation with customers, employees, and investors. And if there are a breach or there are a disruption to your business from a supply chain, vendor, employee, or customer service perspective, this is impacting your bottom line and how people work and how it impacts your business. So the way that ServiceNow helps really goes back to that mission I talked about at the start of making the world of work better for people. You can see your areas of risk at the top here. This spans all the different lines of business of a company: IT, security, legal, finance, and service. ServiceNow brings this all together with a common data set to give you continuous monitoring, integrated workflows, and the ability to respond and take action in real time. So on the right, you can see that you can improve your business decision-making, reduce cost, break down silos across your organization because of that workflow, reduce your regulatory exposure, and build a more risk-aware and compliant organization. Here's what ServiceNow business continuity encompasses, and you're going to see the following 4 areas demonstrated in the demo today. You'll see the areas of business impact analysis, or BIAs, how that flows into business continuity and disaster recovery planning, and how that moves into planning exercises and recovery management, and then how that all leads into crisis management. Now, this is all built on the ServiceNow platform, and everything in the ribbon below you see, from service mapping to facilities management, vendor management, mobile capability, as well as linking to EM&S or mass notification as possible. And these capabilities across the organization are important because business continuity and a resilient business does not exist in a vacuum. You need to have visibility and the ability to act across your organization so that customers, these days are coming to me because they're finding that their previous plans were inadequate. They might have multiple systems that did not work together, or they have siloed Excel or even paper-based binder programs on a shelf that really didn't scale in this environment. Okay, so right now we're at the little green triangle. With COVID, we're in crisis management. We had a pandemic, we're on the path to recovery, and we're moving into incident management. And ServiceNow is going to help you quickly get through to recovery and restoration. Companies are talking about back to work. So how are you going to manage that? How are you going to manage if there's an increase in virus cases again and you have to go back home? How are you going to restore yourself from this incident? Well, a good example of this is Fairview Health, a healthcare provider in the Midwest. We especially appreciate our frontline workers in these times, and Fairview is a good case of how this can all come together. The challenge they had is one that we're seeing and hearing from a lot of customers today, in that they had manual processes and systems that were not tied together. They had legacy systems, or they might not have a system at all, or they had multiple systems. So all of these were at play in their case. And in a lot of cases we're seeing. And the challenge with those recovery plans, they move to ServiceNow IT service management and business continuity. And these solutions can work separately, but they also work better together because you can know in real time of an issue or an incident and be able to see that in a single platform. So they were able to automate their disaster recovery process, achieve higher accuracy and more timely single source of truth data, and that saved them months, as you can see here. Of course, we talked at the beginning that this means real money to an organization, and there's a very concrete ROI. In fact, their DR analyst and IT service management office manager for Fairview said, by managing DR within ServiceNow, they could save huge amounts of time and know they had an accurate, up-to-date, single source of truth. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to Edgile, but I'd also, mention that if there are any questions along the way, please send those on to us at the chat. We'll have some Q&A at the end, but feel free, and we'll track those questions for you.
All right, thanks, Travis. And so just to tee this up, what you're going to see from Chris and Jay is what we're hearing from our clients today. Clearly, of utmost importance is protecting revenue, and how you do that using BCM. Remaining operational is right behind that. Many companies are looking at how they recalibrate their supply chain. There might be a lot of dislocation to it. And so how do you get that recalibrated? And then finally, should various threats hit or occur, we've got to recover quickly. And so what we're going to do now is turn this over to Chris, who's going to walk you through these 4 areas and some of the questions we think about them, and then you'll see them in the system. So with that, Chris. think you're on mute, Chris.
Oh, thanks. Sorry about that. Hello, thank you, Brandon. My name is Chris Roberts, and I'd like to walk you through sort of how Edgile approaches business continuity management and resiliency practices in enterprises, and then how our framework has really been transformed by marrying it with ServiceNow. And I think that this Edgile resiliency framework is a good place to start, because whenever we engage with a client on resiliency, we always start here on the left. We want to understand what is the business entity hierarchy, understanding the locations, the functions, the processes that really make up the business. And once we have a full understanding of that, we can apply the three resiliency practices of impact analysis, threat analysis, and impact scenarios. And understanding that you get the typical outputs you're probably used to from a BCM practice that allow you to prioritize and determine the steps necessary for a recovery operation. But when you take a strong BCM process and marry that with a very strong BCM platform, we found that it really elevates the quality of the overall effort, allowing you to gain insight, greater insight from your analysis than you otherwise would have, and allows you just to better coordinate the entire process across the organization, allowing you to pull in information that would otherwise just go unnoticed. So if we go to the next slide, I'd like to just kind of illustrate some of the benefits of this using a US-based manufacturing client as a case study here. This particular client has operations across the United States. They focus on producing trucks and heavy equipment. And the reason why we picked this is pre-crisis, 90% of their sales were through regular stores and only 10% online. That basically flipped during the crisis, where 95% of their sales went to online. And so in spite of this, they remained very resilient throughout the pandemic, mainly because they were able to see many of the impacts of this beforehand and prepare the organization. So some of the key things they did, which we'll go through in a little bit more detail, is they identified that their website and online payments processing were going to be critical to protecting their revenue, and they took steps to ensure that they had the necessary architecture capability in place to support the load. And they also discovered things, for example, that they had a single point of failure critical supplier for a particular component, in this case, the transmission, and they were able to diversify the supply chain to help build resiliency in their supply chain prior to the incident. And so we'll show that as well. And so we're just going to step through these four goals and show how the client was able to use resiliency planning and the ServiceNow module to achieve these goals. And I think these goals probably resonate with any company. That's how do you protect revenue through adequate planning, how to remain operational in the worst of times, how to recalibrate a dislocated supply chain, and how can you recover more quickly. And so if we go to this first one, protect revenue, for this particular case, we went through and did dependency mapping and scenario analysis using the revenue generating processes. And through the scenario analysis of a pandemic and understanding their dependencies, it was very clear that they would become very dependent upon a function, in this case, their online sales, which they're normally not dependent upon at all. And therefore, these two processes, which may typically be a non-critical process, but all of a sudden become a critical process. And so understanding that, they were able to take action to increase the ability of those processes to, and especially the systems that support that process, to handle the expected workload that they would have to receive on very short notice. Now, going on to the second goal, how to remain operational in the worst of times. So in this particular case, again, through a combination of scenario analysis and dependency mapping, using the graphical outlays that the ServiceNow interface can provide, they were able to see that in addition to the website payment processing needing to have the necessary capacity to handle a surge, they understood that they have a pick, pack, and ship team that cannot be automated. It has to be made manual in this case. And so they understood they would need to figure out a way to put the necessary health and safety requirements in place prior to an incident to ensure that this particular process could still continue to function in a largely manual manner. And they were able to do that and had a minimal impact of that particular process. Moving on to this third goal, how to recalibrate a dislocated supply chain. So this actually came about primarily doing exercising, and during exercising they found that they were highly dependent on a particular vendor, resulting in up to 8 to 10 weeks of delay for a key component. And so that allowed them to understand that to become a resilient company, they needed to build a resilient supply chain, which means they had to relieve themselves of dependence on a single vendor for this particular product. They were able to select an alternative vendor. They used them during normal operations, but now they have some resiliency during a pandemic-like event. And then finally, the final goal here is how to recover more quickly. And they really found the best way to improve the quality on this is through quality exercising. It's not enough just to have a set of plans and let them sit on the shelf. You need to exercise them so everyone in the organization understands their particular role. And more importantly, it helps uncover things that just didn't get caught during the scenario analysis. In this particular case, they discovered that their VPN architecture was never architected for 100% of employees working from home. And so it allowed them to start improving that architecture as well as to start moving towards a architecture that's not reliant upon VPN. And as I mentioned before, allowed them to identify that they had a critical dependency on a single supplier, and they were able to build some resiliency around that. So those are the kind of the four major goals that this client was able to meet by implementing both a strong BCM process and marrying that with a strong BCM platform that allows you to gain those key insights to the business that may not be obvious up front. And so just to kind of show this to you even better, I'm going to go ahead and toss this over to Jay so he can take you into the system itself and give you a little tour. All right, Jay.
Thanks, Chris. So I will go ahead and switch over to our demo environment. So this is our instance of ServiceNow. And the first thing we wanted to walk you through is a dashboard we've set up for our business continuity management process. So along the top here, we have two pie graphs, which are just showing us high-level information about our process, including the status of all of our business impact analysis, as well as the status of our threat assessments that are occurring. And for folks who maybe aren't as familiar with ServiceNow, each one of these reports, we can click into any one of these wedges. So for a given chart, if we want to see the two submitted statuses, we could click in there and it would show it to us so that we could dive deep on the data. Similarly, in the report below, we've broken out those BIAs by the different locations within our organization. So this helps us understand, have we adequately assessed the processes in all of our different locations? Do we fully understand the potential impact if one of these locations were to go offline? And so we could see for one of our facilities here that there is a large number that are in a new state. They haven't been filled out, and maybe we want to see who's responsible for filling those out so that we can take action to make sure that they complete those assessments. Based on those assessments, we're going to have a lot of information about our processes. We're going to understand the impacts if they were to lose technology or a vendor, but we also want to understand the impacts to revenue should we lose any of our processes. And so this next report is really drawing attention to the processes that have been deemed revenue critical, those critical revenue generating processes for our manufacturing customer. And so in their instance, their truck manufacturing process was obviously one of the key revenue generating processes, is in that if they can't manufacture their main product, they can't sell it, and they can't generate that revenue. But beyond just the manufacturing of those trucks, their retail chain is the other key aspect. And that includes both their e-commerce and their dealer sales network. And that's where all their brick and mortar sales come through their dealer network. And so, through the assessments that were performed and the analysis our client performed, they realized that prior to the crisis, a majority of their revenue came from brick and mortar, but they wanted to be prepared in case anything did happen. In this instance, it came to fruition through COVID that their e-commerce channel could potentially become a key revenue generating process. So they decided to deem that key for their planning purposes. Beyond just performing an impact analysis, if a particular process were to go offline, we're able to perform threat assessments. And those threats can be anything from earthquakes and floods and tornadoes to fire or pandemics and epidemics or loss of people in generic sense. And it was through an analysis like that they realized that their dealer sales network would be most at risk if there were any pandemic or epidemic scenarios, or if there was a loss of personnel, key personnel in the network. And so it was this threat analysis that helped them realize that this is some focus they need to put towards their business and how they need to be prepared for their e-commerce solution. And the other key threat assessment here is specifically for our Rockville, Maryland shipping facility. And they performed a site assessment and to understand what would be the impact to our pick, pack, and ship group if that same scenarios were realized. And again, those pandemic scenarios obviously very applicable to what's going on in the world. And so it's this facility-based threat paired with this next chart that happened that helped them understand their business was not well prepared. And so this Rockville, Maryland column here, and just to orient you on this chart, each one of the rows represents the RTO time for a given process, and then each one of our columns is a location. So we can see for our Rockville, Maryland location that we have 10 processes that have an RTO time of 4 hours and 3 that are 8 hours. And so that increased risk from the pandemic scenario helped them realize that both the Rockville, Maryland and the San Antonio offices had just a high concentration of critical processes, and they needed to pursue geographic diversity and redistribute these key functions across their national offices, especially when compared to some of their other offices where there's hardly any critical processes in place. They have 35 total processes for the organization that had that 4-hour RTO, and 20 of those 35 were between those two offices. So this type of analysis can really help them prepare their organization in advance of any crises. The last report I want to draw your attention to is allowing us to view vendor dependencies. The ServiceNow Business Continuity Management solution allows you to map dependencies between processes, applications, vendors or hardwares, the various groups within your organization, and we'll show you what that looks like in a moment. But with all of that data, we can start to identify when we maybe have a single point of failure due to reliance on a single vendor. And so previously through this analysis, our client realized that this transmission supplier for their truck manufacturing process was single source through this ABC transmission vendor. They realized that if for some reason ABC transmission was unable to fulfill their orders, that their entire business essentially would come to a halt without the ability to manufacture their trucks. So they sought out supplier diversity and brought on XYZ Transmission as a minority supplier, but also put in contractual provisions that should ABC Transmission be able to fulfill their orders, that XYZ would be able to ramp up and keep our manufacturing company operational. The next screen I want to walk through is looking at our truck manufacturing process. So as part of the business continuity management solution, we're able to define those child and parent dependencies for our truck manufacturers. We're able to say that our ability to pack and ship, our ability to sell through our dealer brick and mortars and our e-commerce sites is dependent on our truck manufacturing process. Similarly, our truck manufacturing process is dependent on our vendors. We see that from our ABC Transmission and our XYZ Transmission vendors here on either end. But it's also important that our assembly processes, our component ordering processes, logistics, painting, supply chain management, all remain operational for our truck manufacturing process to proceed. So one common question we get from folks is, how do you get all of this information, these processes, these applications, any vendors, hardware, the various groups within the organization? And you can leverage the power of the ServiceNow platform by using the CMDB. If your organization has previously configured that and you have that information available to you, there's native connectivity into the business continuity management solution here. So you don't have to go and create all the records for your organization to populate this. Similarly, the use of the CMDB is not a dependency for the business continuity management solution. So if you don't presently use this today, you're able to take full advantage of the solution otherwise. So it's through this type of view that it helps the organization take easy analysis and identify any single points of failure, and they can even drill down into any one of these processes. So if I wanted to maybe look at our e-commerce process, I can click right in a second. It'll refresh, and then we can see from an e-commerce perspective, what are all the different dependencies based on that. So you're able to chase the dependencies to really understand kind of a cascading failure scenario where if one part of the organization goes offline, you have the potential, obviously, to have a cascading failure. So in addition to performing those business impact analyses, mapping these dependencies to understand their operating environment, their organization at large, you have the ability to document recovery plans, BCDR plans, in terms of how you would go about recovering from a failure. And what's nice about the business continuity management solution in ServiceNow is it will leverage these dependencies that we have here, where if I say that my truck manufacturing process has gone offline, it will tell me all of the upstream and downstream dependencies so that I can understand, oh, wow, if my truck manufacturing went offline, I maybe have a issue with my pack, pick, and ship process, or maybe I'm going to be unable to fulfill my e-commerce orders. And we can select other processes to pull together all the different continuity plans that need to be executed in a recovery event management situation. And through those recovery events, we can obviously take action should we have a realized downtime or loss of process. But you can also perform exercises. And the exercise for our client was key in understanding a few things. So that they ran an exercise that if for some reason a key vendor went offline and they chose their transmission supplier, and if all of our corporate offices had to work remote, how would our business survive? And so they realized two key points in their exercise. The first is that they needed to increase their VPN capacity. They needed to make sure that if they find themselves in an all remote workplace scenario, that the business can continue. And so they took that action based on this exercise to ensure that their VPN capacity would be able to support the entire organization. And they looked for supplier diversity based on the identification that the transmission supplier was a single point of failure for the entire organization's ability to generate revenue on a day-to-day basis. So through these recovery events, we're able to identify participants, making sure that the right folks are involved, either from an exercise perspective or if this is an actualized event. And we can appoint individuals to the various different roles that we may need to run our recovery. So we maybe need an incident commander, different officers for security or liaison, and then different leads from an operation, planning, logistics, and finance side. Similarly, we can rope in the various sponsors, the contributors of this process. And this links to the user groups and the users that are already in ServiceNow. So there's no additional configuration necessary. But as part of this particular plan, we're able to see this recovery event, we're able to see all the plans and all the tasks that were undertaken. And for each one of the plans, we can specify the priority of a given task. So if one of our first tasks needs to be to notify the continuity team or the disaster recovery team, we can make sure that that's the first action that occurs. But we can also specify some lower priority tasks that should the recovery team have bandwidth, we want to take on. And so when you take all of these plans into a recovery event, it shows you the amalgamation of all the different plans sorted by your priority to make sure that you're able to take the appropriate action. I think maybe we have a question. And on the Q&A. So the question is, does the BCM dependency map automatically update the GRC workbench risk dependency maps, or is there a native relationship between the two? You know, Travis, feel free to jump in here, but there's a ability to have a native connection between the BCM solution and the GRC stuff, so that you can, you know, inform your processes based on these recovery events. And so,
yeah, that's right. So that would affect your impact, as well as you can have that likelihood as well as that impact change on your risk dashboard. Correct.
Okay. So ultimately in our exercise, you know, they took that effort to perform their lessons learned and identify those areas for improvement, which ultimately helped prevent serious impact to the organization in the current COVID-19 environment. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Brandon to talk about how we can get started with ServiceNow BCM.
Yes, thanks, Jay. And as you saw, there's a lot of good information that we just went through. And you might be thinking, well, how do I get started? What's a path forward? Might seem a bit overwhelming. And so what we have here is really what we call the resiliency journey. And you can see that it moves from left to right, and it's a 5-step process. And think of this 5-step process as reiterative as well, right? And so you go through knowing your risk, and then identifying and knowing your critical assets, and then building that resiliency plans, recovering from those incidents, and then finally building that control assurance as you go through this process. And this is not a one-time thing. Like, so, you know, the vision and the expectation of this journey is that you would, you know, recycle through it on a periodic basis, whether that would be, you know, annually, semi-annually, and it might be different for different types of resiliency to incidents that you build. And then below those steps, what you see are the capabilities that exist for each one of them, as well as tying into the ServiceNow modules. Like to call out that, you know, when we think about this journey, we include the emergency apps many or some of you might be already leveraging that were released by ServiceNow in March. And so we think about that, kind of a holistic perspective as we go through this journey. And then from an Edgile perspective, we have built accelerators in each one of these steps to help you quickly leverage that functionality of ServiceNow BCM and get this fully up and running in a quick manner. The last piece to just note on this is that you might be in step 3 right now, and that's okay. And when we think about that journey, we're able to jump in on a step 2 or a step 3, or maybe perform some sort of like just a quick look back on the earlier 2 to help you think through, like, am I capturing everything correctly on this journey? On the next slide, then what we do have is just a couple of quick options. For those of you that are BCM clients on ServiceNow today, and maybe thinking about, well, it doesn't seem like our COVID-19 response has really worked that well. Where are there improvements? We offer a 2-week assessment that goes through and really looks at how you're leveraging BCM. We start documenting gaps that we see, might be dependencies that Jay walked through, or are you doing enough exercise management, or are you doing the right types of recoveries to threats, and then provide a roadmap on how you quickly get this, start leveraging this functionality to support you in your pandemic response. For those of you that aren't using ServiceNow BCM, we look at this as really a 12-week project to get BCM stood up and you're leveraging it. And that's thinking through like how you configure for BIA or demand management, or creating the business continuity or disaster recovery plans, and then getting through at least a cycle of recovery exercise management. And this 12 weeks is really, we get the system operational. Clearly you might want to extend that project a little bit to further refine it. But from a pure ServiceNow BCM perspective, it'll be operational and working and correctly configured. So with that, realizing where we're at, I just wanted to open it up. I know we had one question come through. Open up for Q&A, and as Travis said earlier, you just type any questions into the Zoom meeting, and we'll be ready to answer.
One thing I think we could cover is a lot of customers ask about, how to bring in Word, Excel, SharePoint, things they already have in current programs. Could the team speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, Jay, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sorry, starting to get off mute there. Yes, we have a lot of clients who like to do that, and there's a few different ways that we've seen work really well. For any record within ServiceNow, you have the ability to link attachments. So a lot of times for something that's in a draft state, you have the ability to load a version onto ServiceNow, and especially with the ability to do the commenting and the collaborative nature of that, folks will oftentimes take that offline, make the comments and edits they need, and put that back there so that folks can make sure that they're versioning correctly. It's worth mentioning that ServiceNow is built to be collaborative. So for any given record, 2 people can be there at the same time making edits. And if you make an edit on a field, it'll let the other person know so that you're aware that, hey, someone else was in here, changed something. And it's not like some systems that'll put a hard lock on a record that only one person can be looking at it at a time.
Yeah, it's also important to note that on our migration quick starts that we include, migrating over from a former system, whether that system is paper or that system is another technology. We include that migration as a component of our quick starts.
Great, thanks for that, Chris and Jay. Another question I often hear is about customizations and configurations, how that's done in the system. And the answer to that is, that the fields and tables in ServiceNow BCM are customizable and configurable, and those can be done by the ServiceNow administrator. So that's, again, something you can leverage from your existing use of the platform. You should have that capability in terms of your ServiceNow administrator. Any other additions to that from the Agile team and what you see folks do there?
Yeah, and just to expand on what Travis was saying, ServiceNow is a low code or no code platform, so folks are able to make changes without a ton of technical coding knowledge required. So you're able to add additional fields to track attributes that are important to your organization very simply, so that you can really extend the use of the platform for how you as an organization do that today.
Great, thanks for that, Jay. I see another question here. It is, what work streams take most of the time for implementation?
That's a great question. Chris,
I'll let Chris jump in.
Sorry. I think it depends a lot on, what's the implementation? Are you going from a ground zero state, or instead of, you're starting from ground zero, or are you kind of migrating from something already existing? It's kind of also like where your organization's at in terms of maturity in BCM processes. I think that, maybe Jay, you can answer from a technical perspective. If they have, say, a fairly mature BCM process and they just want to migrate that to ServiceNow, what's your experience with that?
Yeah, honestly, the biggest technical work stream is usually data migration, just getting everything. If you have that all, in a different system, or you had it in spreadsheets and you're using that, just getting into the system. ServiceNow has a lot of different tools and methods for getting data into the system. So you're not entering it manually, but it's just a matter of getting it in the system in a way that you can leverage the tool. And just to echo what Chris said, I think from a complete end-to-end process, the implementation, just nailing down what your current process is today, what you like about it, what you want to keep, and how you want your process tomorrow in ServiceNow is oftentimes the largest chunk of time.
Yeah, and I think I would just, to maybe add and maybe close this question is I think, people tend to think that maybe the processes or the locations are the most critical, when in really the big picture they may not be. And so sometimes it's kind of changing that perspective, right? And I think about like where you can get alignment on like RTO. You saw Jay demo that. Like that can take time on what's the rating and how much time does that really take? Or if you think about the dependencies, right? I mean, that can take time to build that out. So I think it's just echoing what you heard Chris and Jay say, where it's it may not be actually the technical perspective. It's some of the outside the system that you need to figure out if you haven't built that out or don't have it at a mature level.
You're maturing the technology as you mature the process itself.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay.
Well, if there are no more questions, I'm always happy to give folks a little more time back in their day these days. And I'd also like to draw folks' attention to the Knowledge Conference that's been taking place the last few weeks. We have a ton of great business continuity, risk management, vendor risk management topics going on there, and those are all accessible and free and being recorded. We had keynote today by Bill McDermott and CJ Desai. So those were fantastic, great customer use cases and stories. And also, we can show the resources slide here as we close that folks can refer to. And we'd be delighted to engage with you. This is a very timely message and something we're working with a lot of folks on these days. So look forward to continuing the conversation with you. And here are the resources there on the slide, and those will be available after the call as well.
Yep, absolutely. Echo what Travis said. Very, very thankful for your time. And if you have questions, these are the resources to reach out to, or you can, if you already know us, please reach out directly. We're happy to help.
Okay, great. Thanks everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye now.